Welcome to Teams Tuesday, a podcast about mastering the best about what other people have already figured out. Teams Tuesday focuses on insights and lessons that never expire. You will walk away from every episode with actionable insights that help you get better results and be more productive.
This was about as bizarre and easy as it gets.
The client just couldn't make up their mind.
I feel like we had top.
Went from a project of 20 weeks to just 2.
The DevOps was a cultural shift.
This is Teams Tuesday with your host, Peter Ward.
Welcome to Teams Tuesday. This is August 2022. My name is Peter Ward. I'm the host. I've got a great guest, Simon Hudson, who's talking with teams and tips. Welcome to the show, Simon. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks very much. Enjoying the sunny and warm weather over here in the UK.
I know. I'm into in the UK. We've had a heat wave for the last 2 months almost. I think it's a drought session. So there's a hosepipe ban coming to our garden shortly.
Yep.
I believe. And you're based in the UK. Whereabouts in the UK are you based?
So I live in Yorkshire, so about 200 miles due north of London, about 10 miles west of a city called Hull that you probably have never heard of, but it's a fine city like so many English cities.
Okay, very cool. And am I correct here? You're a bit of a classic car kind of guy?
Oh, I mean, I've got far too many hobbies, but cars have always been in my blood. So I have a 1972 Triumph GT6, one of the most beautiful cars ever made. And then I have a 2006 Aston Martin Vantage, which is probably the most beautiful car ever made. And a couple of others, a 1985 Mini was my wife's. I rebuilt a 1970 Triumph Herald for my daughter. And then I knock around in a Tesla Model 3 when I'm feeling virtuous.
So when I win the lottery or something, you know, DeLorean, they're coming out of a new car, a new DeLorean.
Yeah, I heard that.
Okay. Now you say you like narrow boats. Now it's interesting. My parents live in southern Leicestershire called Foxton Locks. Have you heard of that place?
I certainly have. I haven't been through that, but I do know it.
All right. Okay. Very cool. Tell me about the company you work for right now.
I currently own 2 companies. I used to have a third. I sold out of that. That was Cloud2. We'll come back to that, I dare say. But I currently have 2 companies. A company called Kanata, which is a medtech business. We have a clinical advice and guidance platform that lets GPs, primary care physicians, get expert advice from specialists, and that stops people going to hospital. It's a really cool thing. It's a lovely business, and it does great things for people. And then, because I'm a Microsoft MVP, inevitably I have a small Microsoft practice.
And you were a little bit ahead of the time. You were used to have one of the companies, the Internet in a Box, one of the early sort of like pioneers of this.
Yeah.
Assuming.
So the first company I created was a company called Cloud2, and it was built on this idea that most SharePoint projects at that time, and this is going back 20 years, something like that, most projects failed. I mean, the actual stats on what a meaningful failure is look actually like 80% of SharePoint projects, pessimistically, 50% optimistically failed in some meaningful way. So I had this grand idea that we should stop trying to work out, reinvent the wheel every time. And we designed what we think was the first in-a-box SharePoint intranet.
Okay, tell me what you really mean in your statistics.
Yeah. Well, Microsoft will admit to 20 or 30% failure rate, but we know it was much worse than that. So now these days it's much better because when we started, we don't think anybody else had an in-the-box intranet. When I exited that business, there were 126 in-the-box intranets in the UK. So good time to get out, I think.
Yeah, it's a very saturated market. And also now you've got modern. The internet and the internet in the box business is, it's a little bit obsolete, I would say.
Yeah, and also modern lets you script stuff, so you can roll out internet in the box type products much less painfully than we used to have to do it back in the day.
Classic master pages, CSS, stapling, everything. Yes, I'm familiar with that very well. So, what was your first version of SharePoint?
So the very first version that I used precedes SharePoint 2001. I can't for the life of me remember what it was called. Teams Server, I seem to think. Okay. But it was all related to the Project Tahoe stuff. So when I was living out in Florida, which again, it's quite a long time ago, we deployed what I think was Teams Server or Office Server. I think it was Teams Server. Then when we created Cloud2, the very first versions were, I think, 2001 and 2003. And then as the new versions came out, we pushed rapid adoption. And I guess it was when SharePoint 2010 came out that we thought the technology was good enough to really do what we wanted it to do. So we did loads of stuff from SharePoint 2010 onwards.
Right. Okay.
And then I stepped out of that business about 2 years ago. So I don't do that with them anymore, but I still do other interesting things.
And your favorite Office 365 tool is?
Yeah, okay, well, I absolutely love OneNote. It's my thing. I have a terrible memory. It's something to do with the way I think, but a terrible memory. But, OneNote is my portable memory. It's on every device I own, and everything that I do, I've got a OneNote going on there. I've got one right here, actually. So you see me look to the right, that's me looking at my OneNote notes or making OneNote notes. It captures everything I do.
Yep, and I hear what you're saying. Where do you think Microsoft is going to go with Viva?
See, Viva's really interesting. I've been speculating about this for a while. First of all, I think, well, for once, Microsoft haven't screwed up the branding. Viva isn't a bad brand, but I don't think that it's where it's going to end up. I think Viva at the moment is a sort of a catch-all brand for all the technology they're developing that doesn't require developer intervention. And so that feels a lot like a set of business tools rather than developer tools.
Okay, so it sounds like, well, it's a category, isn't it? I think, is that what you're saying?
Yes. I mean, at the moment they talk about it being employee experience as a category, but I think you can point at a lot of things in Viva and go, not quite sure how that's employee experience. So I think it's really sort of business management tooling that can be delivered as a platform or an out-of-the-box experience. And that pulls through a bunch more consulting and probably a lot of integration. I think that's where we'll see the development community coming back in, is saying, here are these Viva tools, how do we plug that into our other sort of legacy applications and other services? So that'll pull through, but as it stands, I think it's a quite interesting departure for Microsoft, and one for someone like me who actually hasn't written code since the Motorola 68000 processor. I think that's an interesting set of tools because I can do things with that to help businesses transform without needing to bring the developers along with me.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is particularly with Viva, it's very strategic in terms of this is really what's going on with your data. Okay, here you've got a graph, but what is this graph really telling you? And then also, okay, it might be giving you insights, but what is it really telling you? And also how to actually implement an action plan from those insights. Okay, and that's not a developer, that's sort of like a management consultant kind of activity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Insights into action is very much consulting of some form, whether organizations do that inside the organization or pull in externals to help them with that. But again, it doesn't stop there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff which is driven by the graph in Viva, and then you go and look at Viva goals and go, hang on, that's nothing to do with the graph right now. I think it will be in future. Again, there'll be integration points or inform goals based on people's and organizational activity, but there's lots of things if you're given the Viva name, which are not just about insights. They're actually about other things that are needed to run or help run well-formed businesses. And that gets into my whole diatribe around the maturity model and how to do that. So I'm actually starting to write a competency right now about strategic and organizational management, which touches on the Viva capabilities, but is really a maturity model approach to that.
What do you think Microsoft have got the branding correct on this?
I think that they haven't screwed it up, which is not the same as what you said. I think Microsoft are almost legendary. I spent some years as a strategic marketing professional, and the number of times I've had to put my hand in my head and try not to weep over the mistakes I've made. Even the things that I'd have beaten an intern for getting wrong, like what was it before Dataverse? Oh, they just nicked somebody else's brand. The number one thing you do when you come up with a brand is just do some searches and see if anybody else has already got that trademark. So this time they haven't got it wrong, but they still haven't quite managed to nail down their vision on that yet.
I think what you're telling me is instead of it before we had OneDrive, it was called SkyDrive.
It was,
which was almost like identical to one of the biggest TV companies owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
I'm sure he's got some pretty serious hardcore lawyers who are not too happy with their brand.
And Microsoft sold an awful lot of technology to that group, so I can see why they've gone, we'll rename it, it's fine.
Yes. All right. Okay. So you're giving a lot of tips and tricks on Teams, best practices on that. So I will hand the show further on to you so you can actually see your screen and do your stuff.
Okay, so I just sort of kick that off. This is not going to be a demo heavy session. It's really going to be a lot of slideware, which is something that I usually try to avoid. But this time I'm going to use a load of slides. I may or may not dip into the team stuff as we go along. If anybody is listening and wants to fire up some questions, I think Peter et al. will curate those and pass them to me. I'm quite happy to take any questions as we go along, if that's a thing. But I'm just going to really share some experiences. I sort of started playing with Teams really from the very first day that it was launched, and it took me about 6 months for the penny to drop and me realize why Teams was different to some of the other technologies that we've been playing with. And I've done a lot of work with Teams over the however many years it's been now, including building some IP of my own, which I license out to some of the people that are kind enough to pay me money. So I've got a lot of learning. Some of it is quite simple stuff. Some of it will be stuff you kind of already know, some of you. And some of it might be stuff you haven't thought of. So I thought I'd just share some of that. And to do that, I guess I probably need to fire up my slide deck. So I'm going to try the Present in Teams button.
Is that virtual? Is that background? Is that your loft here? Or is that a virtual?
No, this is my working office. Yeah, it's my loft, my attic office, which is pretty cool. Nice. I managed to get myself an MVP this year, which was thrilling, actually. I hadn't really intended to become an MVP, and then a bunch of MVPs told me I should, and here I am. So I'm very happy about that. But I'm not going to go on about me. I'm going to try and, in the time that we've got, fly through at reasonable pace a bunch of things about Teams, especially some of the learning and the kind of things that anybody could implement in their organization. You don't need to go out and buy additional tools. We're not recommending you get into Teams governance, or actually I think that's a really good thing to do, but that's not what this session's about. This is about the kind of thing that organizations can just use at the user level or the guru level or something at the front end. I'm just going to share some background to Teams, though, because I think people forget how meteoric it's been. Before the pandemic, I looked at the Teams stats, and at that point, it was already the fastest growing product Microsoft had ever released. And then the pandemic drove that at a crazy rate. Everyone was talking about Zoom, and then bit by bit by bit, Microsoft Teams overtook Zoom in terms of general usage. And interestingly now, when I have conversations with people, they will go, oh, we can have a Zoom or Teams meeting. It's not just can we have a Zoom meeting. So that phraseology, the language we use, includes Teams alongside Zoom. So it's even penetrated into the ordinary sort of mind space. So right now, Microsoft are talking about over 250 million users, which is kind of a lot. And there's some interesting stats. I pulled together a few charts on that, and this will be the first one. So been going for 5 years now, lots of users, ridiculous meteoric growth, almost 1,000% growth, million organizations using Teams, lots of languages in lots of countries. And if education's your thing, which I think is a really important metric, lots and lots of educational establishments worldwide using Teams. Here's some of those actual charts. So again, I'm not going to go through all these. That's not the purpose of this. The slide deck will be available to people if they want it, but it gives you that sense of, the growth curves, nice hockey stick type curves, interesting demographics, no dominant age group in the demographics. Everybody from young folk to old folk are using it. Maybe not the 20 somethings, but everybody else. And I started out using Slack. Frankly, I bloody hated Slack. I thought it was an awful user experience, and Teams came along, and my experience seems to be reflected in the growth of Teams versus Slack. It's just left it in the dust.
Right.
So that's that bit. Then I did some other thinking. This is a chart that I use when I'm talking to some organizations and clients. This is a relatively older sort of view of the Microsoft 365 sort of asset space, if you like. These are all the bits of 365, and it's quite complicated. And I talk to people about how you really don't want to put this kind of complexity in front of users. Why do we give them this complexity where they just have Teams? And pretty much everything that they're using is embedded in Teams, and Teams becomes what I call the collaboration desktop. We do our personal work on the Microsoft Windows desktop or Mac or whatever you prefer, but if you're doing collaboration, Teams provides you with a collaborative desktop. And I think that there's a case to be made that most people could spend most of their time doing collaboration inside Teams. And Teams plus Outlook plus OneNote are the three applications which are permanently running on my machines. It's worth saying that arguably Teams isn't the only collaborative tool in town. In fact, even if the town is Redmond, it's not the only collaborative tool, because you've got things like Yammer or Viva Engage, as we probably ought to start calling it. But actually, Teams covers a lot of the different types of collaboration which can go on. And this is a slide that Sue and Mark put together, so I've used it with their permission. And again, I'm not going to go through it all, but I think it's a really interesting insight into how different collaboration tools can cover the different spaces, but increasingly Teams is absorbing all of those. I think the one which is probably not going to change is if I need to go and have that difficult conversation with one of my members of staff, I'm probably not going to do that over Teams. But in the post-pandemic world, I might even do that if I can't get to go and see them personally. So let's do part one. I'm going to start with the beginning. So here we are. I'm going to start telling you stuff about Teams. Again, I'm going to go at pace. So feel free to come back and review the slides if I go too quickly for you. But I think one of the big things that I have an issue with Teams is Microsoft got the naming wrong. I mean, calling Teams Teams kind of seemed like a good idea, I guess, to the branding people. But to those of us using it, it's a stupid name. So I need to collaborate with my team who are part of the HR team using Teams in Teams. It's just a verbal mess.
What would you have recommended then?
Well, I'm going to show you what I call the different parts of Teams, because people don't even know that, because Microsoft have never actually released a diagram of what the different parts of Teams is. But I talk about Teams areas. So all of the things which are labeled Teams in Teams, I call areas. So I'll talk about the HR area, the HQ area, the project area inside of Teams, and that just helps make the language a bit easier. So let's have a Teams call in the HR area is much more sensible language. People can call it whatever they like, but that's what I do. And so I think that it's important to create some kind of common unified language and some syntax around the way that we do this stuff. That's what we're going to do. Let's click there and start with the naming of the parts, because people don't know this, because Microsoft have never released this slide, so I did it. This thing on the left, it's called the left rail. And I quite like the fact that there's now a left rail in many of the 365 applications. So SharePoint has a left rail, Outlook has a left rail, it's a left rail. Call it a left nav if you like, but it's a left rail. So that's good, we call it a left rail. We've got some navigation, we've got my areas and channels, going back to my previous diatribe. So these are areas, and these are the channels within the areas. And then the other parts, again, the slide's available for everyone to look at, but I think it's important that if you're trying to roll out Teams in an organization, that people need to know what it is they're called. So when they call support and go, hey, I've got a problem with Teams, my chat doesn't work, my posts don't work within the HQ area, is a much more sensible conversation than trying to describe it on the screen. So this slide will be available, people can use it, it's in the public domain. I think it's worth making sure that users understand what the individual bits are. Microsoft, when Teams was quite simple, exposed lots of stuff. And as the UI has become more and more complex, they've had to hide a lot of stuff behind drop downs. So it's worth remembering that they're in there. So tabs, for instance, have got this, very interesting and useful set of features, but users don't know they're there unless they're told to click on the buttons and see what they've got. The fact that I can pop out a tab or expand it or do all these things. You've got to tell people where to look for the UI elements that used to be front and center and now inevitably have had to be hidden behind other UI elements. So I think that's important. I think people often miss things like the general info pane. So there's an I button on a lot of SharePoint pages. No one clicks it, they should. It tells you useful stuff. And this is some of my useful stuff. I think it's really, really important to get people to click the A button, the format button in posts and chats, because people don't know what it's there for. But this is one of the most powerful things to have rich conversations with subject headings that tell people what it is you're going to talk about and let them do sophisticated formatting and not just send a, hey Dave, what are you doing this evening kind of a message. So, it's really important to have the UI labeled and known about.
Oh, I agree totally.
And then, files tab, there's a lot of very cool stuff there. File tabs also have menus. There's some pretty cool things, including my favorite, which is the sync button. So I sync lots of stuff, not everything, but lots of stuff to my desktop. And the number of users I find that are used to working in the file system, but don't understand that they can take their cloud content, OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams, and make that available in that place that they're familiar with just by clicking that friendly sync button. And there's this add cloud storage, so I can add other types of content into the files button inside Teams from basically anywhere I like, although I almost always turn everything off except SharePoint. I wish that there was a OneDrive button in there. I want to add my OneDrive content into my SharePoint, into my Teams files tab, but you know, can't have everything.
With what you're saying, you end up having a lot of drive mappings down. If you've got 20 channels, yep, you get 20 drive mappings into your OneDrive, don't you? Yes,
that's exactly right. Yeah, I won't show you now, but my file explorer on my desktop is really complex because I'm a member of 5 different tenants, and so I have content from 5 different tenants all synced up, available on my desktop machine, where I can do file operations from the desktop, but it's all also cloud content. And as you say, it acts much like file mappings on the desktop. But equally, if I'm running inside Teams, inside a files tab in a channel, inside an area in Teams, I can be mapping content from other places in SharePoint into that same files. And so part of the model I have is all of the solutions I build have a document center, which is not Teams attached. It's a standalone SharePoint site, has a bunch of different libraries in it, and often those libraries are then mapped into individual team files tabs. Because they're relevant content. That's that. So then the next part is, having established that I'm going to call them areas, how are we going to have a naming convention about those areas? The number of organizations I go to, and I think most people see this, where Teams has been allowed to get out of control. You've got Teams area sprawl. There'll be hundreds of teams that people just created and no one knows who they are, what they are. There's no governance around that. So I have a model where we try and have some syntax around how to name team areas. And so on the bottom left here, you can see an example of how that might be named. It's not, rigorous, but I think it's important to have a standard by which you're going to name them. So that's good. But there's a couple of other clever things that we do. I'm going to press a button. So I use the emoji function in the desktop to do some clever things with sorting and classifying Teams areas and team channels. So first thing is the Windows key and the full stop, or the period if you're in the US. That's a magic keyboard combination for me, and loads of people don't know it. Windows key and period, and that pulls up the Windows desktop emoji keyboard. And you can actually type the name of an emoji, so smiley or building or whatever you want, and it will search the huge and growing emoji set, which is a standard, international standard for what those are, and give you the ability to directly insert those into text, including into channel names, area names, or whatever. And so it's kind of cool to be able to add either visual representations of what the function of an area or a channel is. So, for example, I have a standard channel in most of my Teams areas called notifications. We'll talk about that another time, but that has a little foghorn or loudspeaker icon that makes it really recognizable whenever you look through a Teams environment. You know that that's going to be the notifications channel. And you can just put that in by using Windows full stop type loudspeaker or something like that. And it helps classify visually those areas and those channels. I'm going to show you something else that it does in a moment though. So I press this, look, it actually works. So I've got a sliding pane because that's what Windows and stuff does. So here is one of my tenants actually. And what I do, the key thing is to try and remove clutter. I see far too many organizations or individuals who just have all of their teams open all the time. And there's a piece of neuroscience that says human brain can handle up to about 5 things at once. 5, a handful. There's reasons why we have 5 fingers, because we can handle 5 things at once. So I try and have no more than 5 things cluttering up my view at any given time. Now I might have broken that rule. Let me just see. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I'm good. I've got 5 teams on display in your Teams area. And it's good practice to get people to hide any of the teams that they're not currently using. And it reduces cognitive load. It makes people spot the thing they're working on more clearly, helps them maintain focus. Pin up to 5 things that you use all the time if you want. Have 5 things that you dynamically hide and unhide when you use them, and put everything else into the hidden teams area. And if you click the ellipsis or right click a teams area, you'll see the show and hide menu item. Just get people into the habit of doing that all the time. It actually saves, tens of minutes a day where people stop just staring at the screen trying to see where the thing they're meant to be using is. And the other thing is, this list of your teams, that is not alphabetical. You get to drag that in whatever order you like, which is kind of cool. So I always have my HQ area at the top and the others ordered based on what's most uppermost in my mind. But if I was to pop out this hidden area, the hidden teams by using the little drop down arrow, that shows them all in alphabetical order. Now that's kind of cool. Let me see what happens if I press my button. So here we go, hidden teams. Now, there's 2 things going on here. First of all, hidden teams show stuff in an A to Z order. But what if I want to group all of my project sites together? And the way I do that is all of my projects or all of my project-like sites, I've put a common emoji at the front using that Windows and period. So I've now grouped all of those common theme areas in one group in my A to Z list, because as far as Teams is concerned, this is a character and a character that starts before the letter A. So it groups them. And here are my other non-project sites listed alphabetically. So it's a really useful hint and tip for being able to manage the way that people see stuff. The other thing you notice is that almost all of ours have a common set of iconography. Instead of it being that nasty sort of standard out the box logo, we use visual iconography to standardize the way they look. It reduces cognitive load, makes it much easier to find stuff of a certain type. And you'll see that some are in one style and others are smaller. Actually, that's a sort of a sub area of one of the other teams, if there is such a thing in Teams. There you go. That's a couple of hints and tips. Using emojis and the Windows period to create categorization, and then using that categorization to create grouping within the teams areas, especially in hidden teams, and then turning show and hide on and off to reduce cognitive load. Right, so I've been talking about focus. There's a great book by a lady called Jane Piper. I recommend you look it up. There's a nice link to the Amazon site if you get hold of this slide deck. I've read it. It's a super book. She's a lovely lady, and she talks really well about the business need for reducing distraction, improving focus. And I think that what I've just described to you is one of the things in Teams to remove distraction, create focus. There's a bunch of other things you can do in Teams to drive focus. So what the first is, just leave Teams, not completely, but if you're in a Teams area that's not very relevant to you, leave it. If you're not using it, get rid of it. Get rid of anything that isn't part of what you need to do day to day. You can always come back later. If you do need to,
people don't do that, don't you?
Oh, I do know,
and they suffer.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like everything. People just don't tidy up after themselves. It's like I have a rigorous rule that I have a bunch of rules in Outlook that just delete things. Anything where I'm CC'd goes into an FYI folder in my Outlook, and after 2 weeks it gets summarily deleted, whether I've read it or not. It's brutal, but it really helps me maintain focus. And I do the same with Teams. I do go and tidy up after myself. I haven't used this team for ages. I'm leaving it. And if somebody in that team really needs me back, they'll invite me. So yeah, they don't, but they should. I think it's good working practice for everybody is, just get rid of stuff that's filling up your head. My head's full already. I don't need anything else in there. And if I do need it, I'll hide it. And if I don't want to hide it, but I don't want to be distracted by it, I mute it. So I have notifications turned off on almost everything. So the only notifications I ever get are the ones that make a real difference to me. The things like if I had a boss, I'd leave that on. I don't mind the boss, that helps. But everything else I turn off. The wife gets to notify me. My daughter gets to notify me, and a couple of other critical things. But most stuff is muted.
A couple of questions coming in. What's the name of your YouTube channel?
I've got a slide right at the end that's got my YouTube stuff.
Okay.
I haven't got a lot of your stuff on YouTube. I will show you my blog site, so we'll get to that later on.
And we do a summary email out to all the attendees, all the links you've sent us on that. Okay. And can you elaborate on the live transcription? Are you talking about that or not?
Am I talking about it? I'm going to touch on it. Yes, I've got a slide that will talk about that. I think the live transcription is a fantastic thing. Also, when we get to it, one of my blogs talks about the transcribe function in Word. It's not in this talk, but I think that's a fantastic tool as well. One that I thought was so good. I wrote a blog and I've done some presentations on that because it's often overlooked.
Sure.
Cool. So look, focus, get rid of clutter, focus on the things you need to do. And so that's what I've reiterated here. So I won't go over this again because we've just said it. Then I'm going to quickly talk about chat and meetings. I think a lot of people struggle to understand where they should have their conversations. And I think it's quite easy, really, is if you need to talk to somebody and there is a place in a Teams area and channel that makes sense, use that first. So because it has interesting governance implications, I've created a persistent record of that. And when people want to find that conversation again, because I'm trying to get people to stop using email, use chat instead. Chat inside a channel if you possibly can, if that makes sense. That's the first place you should try and chat. If that doesn't make sense, then have a one-to-one or one-to-several chat using chat, the conversations area inside Teams, but channels are the first place. Do use app mentions. App mentions, again, often are unused, but at the moment you use an app mention, it fires up an alert in somebody else's Teams to let them know that there's something that they should read. So that for me is the same as sending a message to me in email, where I'm actually in the tool line. Bearing in mind what I said before, in email, if you CC me, as far as I'm concerned, I have no action. I'll read it if I get to it. If you send it to my tool, I think I have an action, and I literally bollock people. And if you're American, you may need to look up what the word bollock means for an English person. But I will bollock members of staff if they put me in the tour and I don't have an action. And I do the same if they CC me and I do have an action. But we do the same with Teams. At mention, if I have something I need to do, you at mention me. You can also at mention a channel name. And that means everybody in that channel needs to take note and do something about what I've sent them. So we do some really interesting things using app mentions. I'll come on to it a little bit later again, but also there's this new feature, relatively new feature in Teams, which is tags. And so you can app mention a tag, which is something that people tend not to know. Tags, how you should use tags is up to a bit of debate. But for example, with new shared channels, which I'll mention again later, I have a shared channel with a joint venture partner. And all the people who are in that joint venture channel are tagged with the name of their company. So if I need them to know about a thing which is in the open conversation, I will mention their tag, and instantly everybody in that joint venture get the alert in their Teams. So there's some really clever things you can do combining tagging and mentioning to ensure that people get that notification that they have a thing to do as opposed to just background noise. So that's the whole diatribe about app mentions. I mentioned the formatting in chat. Please press the A button in a conversation, give any new chat a subject, and then people know what we're talking about. And for heaven's sake, people, use the reply button. The number of times I see people just starting a new conversation when they're replying to an existing conversation, and it makes it a mess. Let's have threaded conversations, use the reply. It's just good practice. There's a bunch of stuff about whether you do or don't want people to be able to create new messages, reply to messages. That's a moderation conversation. It gets into governance. It's a session for another time. I love talking governance, but that's not today. The other interesting feature inside that A button, if you're having a chat, is you can switch between having a conversation and creating an announcement. And announcements look terrific inside Teams. It creates a nicely formatted, sort of boldly coloured message, and it really stands out. So if you've got to tell people about something important, use the announcements function. You'll see a picture of it in a moment, but there's just a tiny little drop down that changes it from a conversation to an announcement, and that's a useful tool. Right, I think we've covered some of that. Conversations versus announcements, give things headings, format it appropriately, always use a subject, use that mentions, always use reply. Next, Don't reply to people's messages if you don't need to. If you agree with it, or you don't like it, or you love it, or any of those common emotions, don't write anything. Just use an emoji. You can interpret an emoji in about 1/10 of a second, whereas it takes me several seconds to read stuff. And if you've wasted my time forcing me to read something, I'm a bit cross with you. So, just use an emoji. It's become part of our lexicon these days, and they're pretty nice. So use those. Do you feel free to flag stuff? So most messages go out as standard, but if it's important, flag it with the important message, the important flag. That's kind of useful. And if you really need to get someone's attention, use the urgent. I use that sparingly. We make that an actionable offence in the organisation if you use it unwisely, because it bugs the living daylights out of people. Because for 20 minutes, it will ping them repeatedly every 2 minutes. But if I really need to get someone's attention, man, that's a powerful tool. And like, all things with great power comes great responsibility. But when you need it, you need it. There's some great tools in there. They're great tools for not using email and having active, focused, notable conversations with people, all within Teams. Covered some of this already. Don't be afraid to escalate from a chat to a video call. Again, we do this all the time. We just go, right, it's not worth pinging messages back and forward. Are you free to have a call? Or sometimes I don't even ask. We'll just press the meet button and instantly go from a low bandwidth to a high bandwidth conversation. And sometimes that's a lot quicker. Basically, if I'm having more than about 3 message exchanges inside of a minute, I switch to video chat. We have a rule in my companies that video is on by default. So it's actually considered rude in my organizations not to share video. And if I have a conversation with people outside the organizations and they haven't got video on, I quite pointedly ask them to turn it on. There's a number of articles I've written about engagement, and people stay engaged if they can see another person's face, which is why we're doing this with some video feeds. You've got to be able to see people. It really engages our base neurology. So, talk to people if you possibly can. If you can't, then my other mandate, again, standard across all my companies, is if somebody for whatever reason can't use or won't use video, make sure you've got a good up-to-date picture of them in their profile, because having a still picture of somebody is almost as good as having a video of them, bizarrely. Right, so use video. If you need to have a meeting, in the same way that we had the conversation about have chat in a channel, if you've got a group call that is related to a channel, create that call inside the channel, not as a separate Outlook meeting. If you're firing up meetings using Outlook, which I do just all the time, unfortunately, the Outlook desktop client doesn't really tell you what channel to create that in. But think about it, maybe take that extra 30 seconds to step into Teams and schedule a meeting in a channel rather than just scheduling a meeting in Outlook. It makes it much more findable later, and it forces the meeting and all the content of that meeting, including any notes you took and questions and answers and conversations that took place in the meeting, it forces that to become part of the ongoing channel conversation. It's quite hard discipline to get into, but really powerful, and again has governance implications if you're operating in a governed environment. Oh yeah, I just mentioned one last thing actually. I know that some organizations have Yammer. Actually, very few organizations in my experience are actively using Yammer or Viva Engage as it now is, if you take that view. But I actually quite like having a social channel. So we have a model of having an HQ area in Teams that's got a bunch of standard intranet-y kind of capabilities, but there is also a social channel in there, and that's where we have social chit chat, and it's allowed. It's in the open, but it's allowed. And then we discourage having social chit chat in the other corporate conversation spaces. Save your chit chat, who's going to the pub, or there's a really good, whatever it's going to be. Save that for the social channel. So we actively encourage, and then you use the social channel. Pushing right on at considerable pace. Meetings. There's loads of stuff in meetings that people overlook. Like I say, schedule them using Outlook or Teams calendars. You can add files to meetings, preferably before the event. So if you've got a proper structured meeting and you want to go over documents or whatever, add them to the meeting. That way people have got them before they even go into the meeting. You can add notes even before the meeting. When you create a meeting via a channel, spins up a whiteboard, a OneNote, and a Files tab for it. So use those. Use them in advance, use them during, use them afterwards. There are some new features. I can't get this to work actually, I can only just get it to work. But in addition to having backgrounds, you can turn on blur, as you've got, Peter, with your background. I've left mine on because I've got a cool space and because people can see the cool things I've got on my wall. But you know, if you've got a location malfunction, it won't hide clothing malfunctions, but it will hide location malfunctions. Give me
what's a background malfunction? What are you talking about?
Well, maybe your kids running around in the background, or something inappropriate on the wall behind, or maybe you're embarrassed about the fact you've got a very large collection of toy cars on the in the cabinet at the back. You know, yes. Maybe that's the kind of thing you don't want people to know.
You've hidden all your Star Wars toys memorabilia.
Yeah, I actually have no. No, I've got some Star Trek toys up there, but no Star Wars toys. But I have got Scalextrix toys. At some point, I'm going to get my green screen re-established here, but I'm not using that today. In fact, actually, I quite like having my background not blurred because I think where it's appropriate, your background says something about you as a person. I agree. And I think in this world of remote working, exposing personality about using your environment is kind of cool.
Well, it's another data point. Like if you go to a face-to-face meeting, people shake your handshake. Yeah. You know, they look at your shoes, look at your suit. Yeah. You know, and here it's like another data point that they are judging and evaluating you in the meeting. Exactly.
And I'm okay with that. You know, I'm an extrovert, as some of you may have figured out. But not everyone is like that. And I respect the fact that some people either, maybe they're meeting in their bedroom, and that's not something they really want to show. Maybe the bed isn't made, whatever it is, blur it, that's fine. But if you feel like expressing your personality through your environment, that's cool as well. A couple of new features. I always have mirror my video on. It just stops my brain working so hard when it has to see me because I look the way I think I look. But there's a couple of other new features. You can actually brighten your image. So I tend to have that turned on. It just brightens up rather than being in a vaguely dingy environment. Although actually I have two sets of overhead lights that I use, which are Alexa controlled. I literally say, Alexa, turn on the Teams light, and it turns this stuff on for me because that's kind of cool. But I think, make the environment as engaging for your colleagues as you can. So brighten your day can work. I love the fact that Teams and Zoom have been playing tit for tat for ages. Sorry, Alexa. Playing tit for tat. So Teams does something and Zoom do it, and then Zoom do something and Teams does it. And I think that's really healthy. So you can now use the space bar to temporarily mute or unmute or permanently mute and unmute yourself using the space bar. So I love those kind of controls. Meeting rooms are great. I love the breakout rooms and those kind of things. I love live captioning. I can read faster than I can hear. So I will often let myself watch the live captions. It doesn't help when you speak as quickly as me, and I'm sorry if the live captions are struggling to keep up, if they're working at all. But I generally run with live captions on, and I'm reading what other people are saying. I also like the fact that actually it can do translations as well in some cases. But live captioning, it also lets me catch things that I may not have heard verbally or may not have processed in time verbally, because I can process stuff visually. And our visual cortex is an amazing thing. So live captioning, I recommend people have turned on. It's a useful thing. We also have been experimenting with having recording on by default, so that all of our meetings are captured and people can go back and review those, or say, actually, we use them as a form of minute taking. We don't take minutes. We write stuff up in OneNote, because I mentioned that, and we have live recording of everything, and those become our meeting minutes. And if we need to keep those, we then don't allow the recordings to be deleted after 2 weeks or whatever the number is today. And that's because we will often go back, because we've run our meetings inside channels, and we'll revisit the notes and the details and the files and the recordings, all that good stuff. So I don't employ a secretary or a PA. I used to have a really nice PA, but anyway, I don't have one of those anymore, because we can do all that stuff on the fly and let the people in the meeting collaboratively create all the minutes and the actions, and you walk out of the meeting with everything done, ready to go and start working, rather than somebody having to type it up and somebody waiting to get those before you action it. So it becomes much more real time. Good practice to stay on mute if you're in some kind of group meeting, but then switch. Actually, we put our hands up and then we talk. If you've got good moderators, they'll see a raised hand and they'll pull you in straight away. If you haven't got good moderators, get somebody to be a good moderator. There's enough of a delay in Teams that it screws people up. We talk over each other all the time, especially if we're doing transatlantic calls as we're doing now. There's about a quarter of a second, and anything over a tenth of a second has got too much latency for the human brain. So we tend to talk over each other, use mute and hands up to manage meetings. Then the other one, of course, is people don't unmute. It happens all the time, no matter how good you are. So watch people's lips moving and get someone to unmute them. It's funny, but it's not helpful. Another feature that people don't know, you can zoom in Teams. So, the standard control or command and plus key, or my favorite, control and the mouse wheel, lets you zoom in all sorts of things. And so play with that. I won't show you it. Just go and play and see how many places you can use control mouse wheel to zoom in. You'll be amazed. I also love the fact that when we're in Teams calls, we have this sort of two-channel conversation. Unlike real live meetings where you can kind of interrupt people and do it in an elegant way, in Teams you really have to have one person talking at once, and you do the moderation thing, but you can do the equivalent of talking over each other by having side conversations going in chat, and then keeping an eye on that and doing all that good stuff. So we recommend using the chat features to exchange ideas, make little notes, challenge people, do all that stuff that you would otherwise do in a live session if we were together in person. We also, even if we're together in person, we'll often run a Teams meeting, capture the video of the live meeting that we're all in the room together with, and the chat stuff. So don't be afraid of using Teams live, even if you're in the room together. It's kind of cool. Next, email. Just don't use email. We almost use no email internally in any of my organizations. We do use email where it's come from an external source and I need to forward it to somebody, but all of our internal email is done in Teams, i.e. we don't use email. And Teams has got, Outlook has got some features now to let you forward an email directly into the channel. So if you've got something that's related to a channel, don't forward it to the people, forward it to the team. And equally, if you need to, you can give people an email address directly of a team. This has been around for ages. You can change whether this is allowed or not, but you can allow internal or external people to email directly into a channel. And if you must, you can also actually email out of Teams to an email address. That's another conversation. So try and get rid of email internally is a good thing. Peter and I were talking about organizations who've got gigabytes or sometimes terabytes of out-of-date, duplicated and mostly completely worthless email. Get rid of it. Let Teams handle that for you. There you go. Again, flying pain. So can do some sharing from there. One of the things I do like is the ability to target a channel when I'm doing that share to Teams. So there's a button inside Outlook. It has to be an Outlook tenant that's got Teams connected, but there's the share to Teams button in my Outlook toolbar. I pull that up. It asks me to identify the name of the channel. Sadly, it doesn't give you a drop down to begin with. You've got to guess the name of the channel. You've got to remember it. But once you've given it a few letters, it'll go and find it, and then you can email into that channel. And then the flip side is down here. If you're in Teams, you can share a message back out to Outlook if that's your thing. I never do that. Once we're in Teams, we're in Teams. Yeah, I'm just going to touch on shared channels. I think we're getting towards the end of my slide deck. But I ought to just touch on this. It's a relatively new thing. I'm not sure if it's even everybody's tenant right now. I have so many tenants that are on the early adopter ring that I lose track of what isn't in GA. But shared channels is interesting. When Microsoft started talking about shared channels, I think it's really cool, but they almost always talked about shared channels as a means of doing external collaboration. It solves a really important architectural issue with Teams, which is how do I have a collaboration space with my internal group, but I also sometimes need to collaborate with external partners. And now I can create one or more shared channels in Teams and invite one or more of those external partners into that shared channel. And my team and those externals can collaborate explicitly in that channel. And it's a very good thing, solves a bunch of security and governance issues and keeps the collaboration in context with, say, a particular conversation that goes on. So I might have a project and I've got a partner helping with the project, but they don't want to be in the whole project, they just need to be in one part of it. So I'd invite them into a shared channel around that part. It might be a building facility management piece that they're helping me with in the project, but they don't need to know all the rest of the project plans and finance stuff, etc. So that's really good. What Microsoft haven't really promoted is that you can share channels with internal people. It's kind of obvious, but they don't talk about it. So I can share a shared channel with a completely different team inside my organization. That opens up some interesting capabilities. So I could have, a finance conversation going on within a project, and I could share that finance conversation with the finance department, and they could have some shared channels in their project, their finance projects area, where they're looking across all the projects, and they've got all the shared channels in those individual project areas. It's an interesting model that you can start to play with architecturally. So I'm fascinated by the capabilities of doing information architecture using shared channels within teams. And you can also share directly with individual people. There's something else that I'm experimenting with at the moment to be able to support third-party organizations, so as a sort of a managed service option. And if I can get this to work, I'm going to be talking about that hopefully at one of the collaboration summits later this year. So watch that space.
All right. What do you mean a managed service team? What do you mean, like?
So what if I'm supporting a bunch of organizations, and what I don't want them to do is all of a sudden 30 organizations ping me and go, oh, it looks like I can't get email anymore. And I already know that Microsoft's got a problem with the Exchange Online service, but instead of getting 30 support requests from 30 organizations, what if I could have a mechanism that pushes out to all of those as soon as I know about it, a message in their sort of IT support team that yeah, something like that. Exactly. There's other uses. I haven't quite got it working yet. I'm looking at the scripting part and how I turn share with people or share with an external team into reality. But I think there's some interesting capabilities there that might become possible. And of course, then I'm going to go and automate all that with Power Automate and other things. But yeah, I'm exploring how we might do that and what that experience feels like at both sides. I mean, literally, shared channels is just coming online. Bits of this don't work yet, even for me. So yeah, but yeah, it should be really interesting.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right, a couple of bits of magic. Again, pieces of sort of magic and fairy dust that people don't know about mostly. Like I say, you can do translation in Teams. So if I'm working with my colleagues in Japan, even sometimes I have to do it with my colleagues in the US, but that's the whole conversation that we need to have separately. But yeah, if I'm working with people whose language I don't understand and I can just about manage English, then Teams will do some translation for me. And automated translation these days is pretty damn good. So that's really good. Post and chat can be auto-translated. And we talked about real-time captions. I suffer from a bit of repetitive strain injury. It's an accessibility issue. So I use the keyboard a lot. I'll use the mouse if I have to, but mostly I'm a keyboard jockey. So I know keyboard shortcuts for loads of things. And one of my favorites is the slash key. In Teams, the slash key opens up a whole bunch of stuff in the search bar. It didn't used to be called the search bar, it used to be called the command bar, but now in Teams it looks like a search bar, but it's still a command bar. And so if you go into the command bar, the search bar, and type slash, it opens up all these things you can do in Teams without having to grab the mouse and peck at something. So the first keyboard shortcut you should learn is Control E. Control and E puts the focus into the search stroke command bar, and then I hit slash, and it opens up all of those magic things you can do. And that wasn't it. Good heavens, I thought I'd put in a pop-in, but I haven't. I'll have to come back to that. So try it for yourself. Go into the Teams, put that.
I'm just doing it now,
slash.
actually.
Yeah, it's very cool. There's all this stuff. You
Good.
go, man, I didn't know you could do that. All these back-end functions in Teams that that it switches you through different parts. I can find people, I can kick off processes, I can set my do not disturb status, loads and loads of stuff. Just spend a few minutes and look at what the slash key will do from you, all without having to give yourself repetitive strain injury by driving the mouse too much. And then the at key is the other one. At lets you target a whole bunch of commands at people from the command stroke search bar. It's very good. While at search has got a lot better in Teams. It used to be, I think the word is rubbish, maybe worse than rubbish. These days it's pretty good. And
you could use Bing. You could use Bing for it, though. That's what we used to use. That's what we recommend. In Bing, you could search Teams, all your Teams stuff.
Yeah. I have that set up with all of my clients. So I tell them they need to use Bing, and actually I embed Bing as a tab inside a search channel inside Teams, just to spin it around the other way. So I get Bing running inside Teams as well as get Bing to search Teams. But I've seen hints. Maybe I'm under NDA from this. So I suspect there may be a possibility that the full Microsoft 365 graph-based search capabilities are coming to Teams. I have seen at least one occasion when I've done a search inside the Teams search bar where it has delivered content from my OneDrive. And that OneDrive content is not in Teams. So I think we're seeing the evolution of search in Teams to become basically the same as doing a Bing integrated Bing Windows search or a Microsoft 365 app search from Teams, and that would be good news, because I want, as I said right at the outset, Teams to become my day-to-day collaboration and activity desktop. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go and check my slide deck and see whether the feature that I thought I'd turned on has or hasn't made it all the way through. Give me 1 moment. It looks like it has not made it all the way through, or I've hidden it. Give me 1 sec. I'm just checking whether I've hidden it in my selection pane, and there's your problem right there. Let me see if by doing this now works. Look at that. There we go. So there's that /command key. Look, there's loads of stuff. You've got it on yours. I won't go through all these, but I think it's pretty cool. And then there's this other thing, which they've just fairly recently introduced, which is you can chat to yourself. You know, some people would say that's a sign of madness. Other people would say that's a pretty cool thing. So I write myself notes. People are in the habit of emailing themselves, but I don't like email. So now I chat to myself. In your chat tool inside Teams, you're in there, which is kind of weird. So I can send myself messages. I can attach files. There's a bunch of interesting things that you can do if you're in the habit of needing to send yourself messages. And certainly if you email yourself, well, you know, you can stop that as well. Do it this way. Yeah. Hey, who knew that?
I like that. I actually do the email thing. I have OneNote as well on my phone and everything. But you know, sometimes you have a URL, you can do it, and yes, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it sits there in my chats. I've got Teams everywhere, and it will notify me that I've done things to myself, which I guess is weird, maybe masochistic, but you know, but sometimes useful. Right, getting to the end of this, because I'm sure we're at that time or thereabouts. There are other useful resources. Don't be afraid to use them. I have the Microsoft Resource Center wired up to all the Teams environments that I have anything to do with. It sends me a message about once a week with a new post in that channel, and quite a lot of that is pretty useful, especially if you've got, you know, non-expert users. But even for people like me that try and keep up to date with everything that Microsoft are doing, it'll fire in a message like one of these, nicely formatted message, and some of you will recognize how they're doing that formatting. Nicely formatted message, and then if I go into the Resource Center proper, into the Home tab, there's this big list of different types of resources they're giving you. You know, why write this stuff yourself when Microsoft are giving you it? They're pretty good these days. Haven't always been, but these days pretty good. So I recommend that. I like it. There are other people who know stuff. I'm not going to give them all. You know, I've given you a couple of links here, but you know, don't be afraid to lean on other people's expertise. It's not down to you to have to learn everything yourself. You know, go and see who else are experts in the field. And just to blow my own trumpet, you know, I talk about Teams and some of the other related technologies quite a lot. A lot of it is this kind of thing, you know, not about the tech stuff, but about the real world user stuff, you know, the things that are a pain, or the things that are clever tricks that get you around stuff, or the things that just concern people. I do a lot of those kinds of blogs, including one of my favorite recent ones is the Message of Doom. Go and check it out. I'm not going to talk about it now, but loads of people, if you've used more than one Microsoft tenant, have experienced the Message of Doom. That's the, you know, I'm trying to get into my own meeting and I can't because it says somebody will let you in. Yeah, but it's my meeting. Let me in, for heaven's sake. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around that I blog about that, you know, that help people struggling with some of the intricacies and nuances of this wonderful platform we call Teams. And that's my blog/website. I'm going to just see if anyone's got their own hints and tips of best practice. If there are any comments people want to make on the chat or questions they've got for me, I'll happily answer almost anything because I'm not shy. And if we don't get any of those, I'm going to switch over to
Peter. One of the things on I use actually on Outlook, I create a folder called Action Required. So every time something comes in, which I don't need to address immediately, I create a step shortcut in Outlook, which is basically Control-Shift-1, and it just moves the email to Action Required. So I know I need to get to it, but I don't need to get to it immediately. So it just makes my inbox much more manageable.
Okay, and does that go into a separate folder for you?
Yeah, I can, exactly,
Okay.
Yes.
It's really interesting how different people do this. So yeah, I used to receive over 100 actionable emails a day back in my corporate and first company days, and that number is unmanageable. So I have a whole bunch of Outlook rules. There's actually probably a blog about that as well, but I do something similar. I tried moving them all into a actions folder, which I then never read. So I stopped doing that, but that's my problem. Yeah, I think it's a very valid thing to do, and certainly if you were to read the Getting Things Done book and articles, that would say that's good practice. Just never worked for me because it's out of sight, out of mind. But I flag everything. The things I need to do get flagged. The other thing that I do quite rigorously, which is not quite the same as saying comprehensively, is almost every team area has a planner, and so I'm quite methodical at using Planner in context to create context-specific things to do. So there'll be a bunch of buckets, but one is a to-do bucket. That's for a particular context. I have never managed to get the personal to-dos to work for me. Nothing wrong with the tech, I'm just rubbish at it. So I leave them sitting in my inbox, annoyingly. What I should be doing, though, if I'm getting messages and actions in Teams, is making those actionable messages, and I need to think about how I do that. That's a good thing. I need to create actionable messages using a Power Automate flow or something within Teams. And I need to go and think about that. I'd make that as an actionable message, but I haven't got that tool yet. So
Yep, I hear what you're saying. Simon, this has been an absolute dynamic session, and thank you for your time and your expertise on this. We should do it again this time next year.
Yeah, well, I'm at your disposal. I'll talk about other things. I thought I'd come in light and higher level. We can drive down into a bunch of things when you're ready to see what else I have to offer. It's been a delight, and I've loved being able to do the session.
Yeah, like the loop, like you're on Teams. I'm sure you could probably do this time next year. The loop would have been developed quite well and be more mature.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what comes out of that, because that adds a whole bunch of actions and that dynamic aspect to conversations and content within Teams. So I think that's definitely one to watch, is how do we use those tools to make everything even more engaging and real time.
But very much so on that. Simon, thank you for your time. And this session is recorded. It'll be pushed out on my blog, on the Meetup page, and on LinkedIn. So enjoy the rest of the day, and everyone attending.
Thank you very much. You've got my stuff. Help yourself.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Cheers.